scientists have warned for years the planet is warming, and eventually we could be at risk of food shortages, increased flooding, and rampant wildfires. Now, a new study reveals that as temperatures increase, so does the likelihood of violence and even war. Solomon Shung is an economist with Berkeley and co-author of the study. So, Solomon Shung, can you tell us, what did you look at to come to this conclusion?
So what we did in this study is we actually gathered 60 earlier studies that had been conducted by over 190 authors from around the world. And what we did is we went through all of the data in all the different studies and tried to understand if there was a common pattern that would emerge that would help us sort of understand if there was a general relationship between human societies and the climates in which they live.
Let me ask you a question. Those studies, which I assume are going to be in some cases over a decade old, wouldn't reflect the globalization that's occurred between economies today. Much of the issues around food and food shortages, food distribution that come along with climate change, to a certain extent, they're not completely fixed, but the news is getting better. And I'm just wondering if looking at old studies doesn't reflect any of that.
That's an absolutely correct statement, and in fact, it's a very important observation. Many of the studies that we look at go very far back in time, just like you were saying, but many of them are also very modern, or use very modern data. So some of the studies look from, for example, 1950 all the way up to the present day. And what we see is that while not every location in the world behaves identically, there are still huge portions of the globe that seem to respond to climatic shifts with many different types of violence. Now, what you're talking about is food prices, but many of the mechanisms that people think might be driving this relationship actually are independent of food prices. So, for example, we do observe that if we put people simply in a hot laboratory room, they actually behave differently towards other individuals.
Right, yeah.
Now, that's obviously something that can't be affected by the market. So.
Right. But, I mean, you've got all different sorts of proof, so to speak, that whenever the temperature is higher, people are behaving more violently. But as we said in the introduction, you're also making a connection to war. Do you actually have any proof that hot temperatures can lead to war?
So we have evidence. There have been many studies on this question. Obviously, it's a very important question. And what we see is that if you follow countries over time and you follow how they respond to changes in the environment, as you shift towards hotter and drier states, particularly in the tropics, the likelihood of civil conflicts does in fact appear to rise. And so this is evidence that we obtained simply by following countries over time. This is actually not doing comparisons across different countries as people used to sort of think about this problem and might lead to some faulty logic.
How would you suggest governments use this data? What can we do with this information, assuming it's correct, to change the bad outcome that it suggests is going to occur?
That's an important question. And so we think that there's a couple take-home messages. I mean, one message is obviously related to thinking about climate change and thinking about what the world might look like if we allow the climate to change. And so our results suggest that if people in the future continue to behave similarly to people in the recent past, the world will experience amplified rates of human conflict. Now, that obviously affects how much we value that future and whether or not we think we'd rather have a different future that we could actually work towards. That's a public discussion. That's an important discussion to have, and that's not up to me. But there's also the potential for intervening and breaking this linkage between the climate. So in future research, we hope to understand, is it something like food prices, as you were suggesting? Or is it something else? Is it something related to how people migrate or how the labor market is performing? If we understand what those mechanisms are, then we can design effective policies or institutions that can help interfere with that linkage and stop climatic events from transmitting their signal into sort of human-to-human relationships.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.